Greetings from New York. We are here again filming the second episode in this location with Julian McBride. He is a forensic anthropologist and independent journalist. Welcome. Thank you so much for being such an amazing friend to me and a tour guide and showing me around the city. Now we get to do this interview finally. It's been a long time.
Anytime. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, thank you. So we spoke last year. You wanted to come to LA. There was a lot of stuff going on. Whether it was work or personal, and then the war, obviously. So finally I said, you know what, I'm going to make a trip out to New York so that I could see you and Sam and Garan. And it's been such an eye-opening experience to be here. And I have this amazing group of people that are supportive and sweet and taking time out of their day to not just interview, but also help me get a feel of the city, which you have been doing. We've spent some time together in the last few days. Please tell me what you're doing now since you are kind of switching things around as far as your career. You have a new Patreon account. Please tell us what you're doing now with all of that.
Yes. Basically, in my past, especially recently, I've been federal government contracting, United Nations, the U.S. government, and I do statistics, and I also report on human rights abuses, war crimes, particularly in the Middle East and the Balkans, which is my regional specialty. For the past 2-3 years, I became a little bit disenfranchised in the work I've been doing, even though it was good pay. It was just highly stressful seeing millions of people be displaced or going through plight, whether it was through Syria, Yemen, Armenia, Lebanon. And I just saw a bunch of inaction and world governments, world bodies, whether it was NATO, United Nations, it doesn't matter, EU. And then you see NGOs, they step up and do the work, local NGOs or even major ones like Doctors Without Borders. And I noticed that you have more freedom to do what you want to do and what you love.
If you're independent.
If you're independent and,
right.
and you're not taking bribes from governments or not having to answer to people who really don't want to hear your opinion unless they want to take credit for your work at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I'm a very unselfish person. I want to show the world that every single person living today is more than just a statistic, they're a human being. But presented in mainstream media, all you see is 500 plus Syrians dead, 200,000 Yemenis dead, but they never explain the background of it. What is going on in these conflicts? You see a lot of US sanctions starving people to death right now, multiple interventions between nations such as Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, it doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, this is what I want to show the world. It's not just what you see on the media, it's like, I want to get people critically thinking of the background, what is really going on and how we could truly help these people.
Right, absolutely. So for people who don't know, myself and many Armenians in Los Angeles know of you and know your Instagram, and they're so pleasantly surprised and kind of taken aback that this, young, African-American man is taking so much interest in foreign politics alone, but especially about our, genocide recognition, the war that's been going on. You've been posting so much information that's critiqued and vetted and made sure that, you make sure that it is accurate and historically correct and just factual in every capacity when you post things. And even things like, you posted things about Nejde or Sohomon or things like that from almost 100 years ago, or even further back than that, whether it be Greek history, Egyptian, Armenian, you're so knowledgeable and you take time to write out these long, detailed posts, and you're essentially giving a small history lesson in each post that you put on Instagram, and you have your lectures. It's just incredible to see you taking such an interest in it. And I know you are an anthropologist, and that's kind of, been your background, but it's more than that. It's, you really take pride in all this work that you're doing, along with all the other ones that we will mention soon. What made you so passionate, especially about Armenians? Because that's, the closest thing to me right now that I see in you, that you write about. What made you so passionate about that?
Okay. First, I basically grew up in a family that was very, very unselfish, very religious and humanitarian. I lived by what my grandmother taught me. It's putting others before yourself is how you make a life. It's not about money, it's your happiness. Because at the end of the day, you're a rich person depending on your happiness. It doesn't matter your wealth. And I grew up in a very, very poor household where even though I was very well educated, I couldn't afford to go to college. So I went in the United States Marine Corps, deployed overseas in Afghanistan, and I lost multiple best friends. And it changed my perception of life and what I wanted to do. So I decided to leave the Marine Corps just from the stress of it, even though I loved it. And I went to college, Delphi University, and I also studied overseas in Crete, particularly Heraklion, and I worked at the ancient city of Erethina.
Where is that?
It's in Crete. It's by the Arkadi Mountains. It's a very, very mountainous area. And
how long were you there?
I was there for nearly 3 years, 3 to 4 years. And my professors, they're my mentors, Professor R.G. Algerakis and Notis Algerakis. They're my mentors and like a second family to me. Their families are refugees as well from the Ottoman Turkish wars. From Notis Algerakis, his family's from Eastern Thrace. They were kicked out after the Greco-Turkish War. Professor Argy's family is from Chios. There was a large-scale Chios massacre. 50,000 Greeks were killed by Ottoman Turks. And they basically taught me stuff about the genocide.
Back then you already knew about all that, right?
Honestly, I didn't even know. And that's one thing that I don't like about the American history educational system. I never heard of the Armenian genocide at all. The only time I heard of the Armenian genocide was whenever I saw commercials or like news clips of Kim Kardashian talking about it, but I never knew what the Armenian people were.
Right.
So when I was in Greece, I decided to do my own research and study, and I just remember breaking down crying about like just reading about this stuff.
Right, of course.
So I asked Professor Argy, again my mentor, I'm like, I wouldn't mind doing a presentation about this, particularly as a capstone. So back at Adelphi in late November 2017, I did a major presentation on unrecognized genocides around the world. Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, Native Americans, and I also talked about how Yemen and Syria, their wars are akin to genocide.
Of course.
And then and then I got in great contact with people, did internship at the UN before I started working there as a contractor. And I went to the Armenian genocide protest, and
yes, I saw pictures of you there.
I believe it was 2019. I went to that, and I was just amazed by how lovely and friendly like Armenians were. They were just so surprised and shocked to see a non-Armenian standing there with them.
Right, of course.
And then I actually have like videos and stuff on my phones of when the Armenians were just like protesting in front of the Turkish consulate, just all the like abhorrent and like racist stuff that you see Turkish counter-protesters say to them. I'm like, what the hell is like going on? Like, why are they saying this stuff? So I did even more research and kept going and going and going. And then I realized, I'm like, Armenians are just people who history just completely forgot about.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, I've read books about like Armenians. They contributed to some of the first forms of writing. The first modern plastic surgeon who actually helped out a lot of wounded veterans of World War I, he was actually an Armenian himself. And I'm just amazed by Armenian history. Myself, my family is a Native American background. My mom's side,
Right.
they're Cherokee, Eastern Band Cherokee, and we went through our own type of genocide, the Trail of Tears.
Right.
My father's side is Greco-Egyptian. They were forced to flee Egypt by policies of Arabization, which means that they weren't allowed to teach Greek to Egyptian, Greek, Hellenic Egyptians in Egypt during the policies of Abd el-Nasser. So a lot of Greeks.
What year?
It was in the 60s,
Okay.
50s and 60s. And a lot of Greeks were forced to flee. So a lot of Greeks now that were back in the Hellenic period in Egypt, all they know is Arabic, and now they're pretty much not really considered Greek at all. Like their national identity was stripped away from them. And that's why I like the Armenians, because no matter what, losing their homelands, losing most of their population, you guys kept a national identity. And that's what I really liked about Armenians as a whole, is the fighting spirit.
Thank you. That's so sweet coming from anyone really, but also from someone who knew nothing about it in the beginning, and then taking such a huge interest, doing all this research, living in a place close to Greece where, you know, our cultures are very similar, and you got a chance to really, really dig deep into it and find so many similarities, not just in the Greeks and the Armenians, but in the Native Americans and things like that as well. So we were, just want to say to the viewers, we were at the Met together, Julian and I, and you take so much time in not just reading books and doing research online, but you go to the museum all the time, and you like read and learn and relearn for hours on end. History of the Egyptians, about the Assyrians, Greeks, Armenians, and granted they had a very, very tiny exhibit for the Armenians. You still knew so much about that region and those types of people. So, I mean, I was jokingly saying to you, you know, you could be a historian or a museum tour guide, and you can definitely do that one day at your leisure, because I know how much you love to tell stories, and you like to be in front of, you know, a large audience and give a lecture, and you do that all the time at the university, correct?
Yes, I just did one earlier this week with Columbia and Adelphi University. I love public speaking as well, because as long as I could get people critically thinking about stuff that happened in the past, I know I'm making a difference, because at the end of the day, they're going to go home and talk about this stuff.
Of course.
And that's my goal in life. It's not money, it's not fame, it's to get people thinking and getting people to engage in these talks.
Yeah,
because
get the gears turning.
the more and more people learn about this stuff, the more and more they're going to request the stuff to be learned in an educational system. When it's requested in the educational system, the more likely policies are under change in the state level. Then it goes up to the federal level. And this is how the change starts. It's by one person reaching to another, and another going to another.
Right, absolutely. It feels overwhelming when you think about like how much effort it's going to take from like the first step in like teaching a young college student, and then the young college student talking to his classmate or his brother or sister or a friend, and then them growing up and going into politics, and then it goes to the Senate, and it goes to this, and it goes to that, and then, you know, journalists write about it, and there's so many branches of talking about history that is forgotten or erased, which is what we have been struggling with, to get it to a level of like, to get it to a higher level of just awareness and like acknowledgement at the very least, which I think we've been fighting tooth and nail all the time for. But it's the reason why when people saw you at these protests for the genocide, they're like, oh wow, someone who has no like gain is really interested in what's going on with us, and he's there genuinely because he wants to fight, or he wants to be a voice, or he wants to teach. So that's, you know, really amazing. So that's one of the things that I saw in you, and you know, loved so much from the beginning. And we've had several conversations on the phone and on Instagram, and we've become friends. And I acknowledge that and respect that so much about you, because I know that it comes from a really good place.
Thank you. I always say Even though history has been written by the victors, there's always, I wanted history to be written by the victims. Because at the end of the day, there's two sides to a story. All we see in history is just the winning side of the story. You never see what happened on the other perspective. Like, for example, I can tell you straightforward, as a former United States Marine, they demonize people overseas before you deploy. Like, we have no idea the cultures of people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. We never really learn about the history, the sex, the different ethnic sex groups. All we know is basically our mission, and that you treat anyone as a potential hostile, whether it's a civilian or a combatant. And that's a problem, because it starts a cycle of violence. For example, I'll give you what a cycle of violence entails. So, for example, the war in Yemen. A Saudi airstrike hits Yemeni civilians, but those Saudi missiles are made in the United States. So these parents who have those children who were killed in these airstrikes, they're going to be mad not just at Saudi Arabia, but the United States
as well.
So odds are there's going to be some type of retaliation against whether it's a diplomat building in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, or the United States as a whole. And when that happens, now the United States, particularly the war hawk politicians, military-industrial complex, they want another form of retaliation. And the retaliation keeps coming back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's an endless cycle of violence.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I'm going to come back to that. I'll circle back to it. You have no problem calling out people or organizations or the government or the military or whatever it is that you want to talk about. And that's the beauty of freedom of speech, is that you will call out anyone and say, this is what you're doing wrong, and I see it, and I'm going to call you out on it. And several times, even you're an American, you're born and raised here, you've served 3 to 4 years in the military, and whatever it may be, like, you've done your service to your country, and you have said many times, not just about foreign affairs and things like that, but even like your own government here, like, oh, well, this is why America gets in trouble with X, Y, and Z, or this is why America shouldn't stick their nose in X, Y, and Z. And, you could still be a patriot, and you could still love your country, but you can also say, you know what, this is wrong that my country is bombing Syria again, just like recent events.
That's why I always say there's a difference between a nationalist and a blind nationalist. The nationalist sees the problems in their country and they want to fix it and make it better. The blind nationalists always will make excuses for what their government does, no matter what, will follow orders to the death. And we've seen this happen before in history. Nazi Germany, Young Turks regime. You have the Hutus who slaughtered Rwandans remorselessly, without remorse. Those are the type of blind nationalists that we do not want in this world. We want people who love their country so much they're willing to make a change from the inside.
To make it better. Absolutely. Speaking of, speaking out, aside from speaking your mind and writing extensive posts about history and current events and everything like that, even you're so passionately involved in like everything that happened in the war in Armenia and Artsakh, and the geopolitics of it, and you can point it out on the map, and what happened with the revolution and Nikol and everything like that. So you are an unbiased person. You are looking at it from the outside as an unbiased person, and you're saying, look, this is what's happening, this is what he said, and this is what she said, and things like that. And you're seeing it, and you're writing about it, and you're speaking up. And sometimes most of the time you get a lot of praise, and sometimes you get some unwanted messages in your inbox, on your DMs or whatever, from people who are offended by what you're saying. And I think in general, Armenians are very hot-headed, and when it comes to how they react to things, and we're very passionate people, and we want to be stubborn and say something about if somebody says something to us that maybe ruffled our feathers a little bit. In our defense, we do see it kind of more of an aggressive comment if a non-Armenian says something to us. But in your defense, I like that you're pointing it out and you're saying things, and then you combat that whenever they message you. And I want us to hear the truth sometimes. The truth hurts sometimes, and sometimes when other people point it out to you, you're more inclined to maybe feel hurt about it, but then you're like, oh, you know what? Like, I get what he's saying, even though it hurts to hear it. So you've had some conflicts with that, with people messaging you.
So my thing, particularly in life, especially when it comes to Armenian issue, is I've always read the excerpts, especially post-World War I, the Sykes-Picot Partition and the Treaty of Sevres. After Mustafa Kemal Ataturk became very, very powerful, largely by British backing, and he declared war against Greece and Armenia. Even though the Allies refused to help Greece, they saw something in Greece that they didn't see in Armenia. And there's an expert that I keep on my phone and my laptop that says, if the Armenians had oil, history would have been written different by them. And this is what I want Armenians to get in their heads, is that invest in yourselves, build factories, become tech giants, stuff like this, because at the end of the day, no superpower will ever come to your aid unless they want something out of it. Like, for example, you see France right now backing Greece, and it isn't for NATO purposes primarily. It is primarily because Greece and Cyprus has deep sea oil that is just recently discovered. That some of that is what France wants. If that oil was discovered before 1974, the Turkish invasion of Cyprus never would have happened. And like, I'll give another example. The British mining company Asian Angle Mining PLC, they backed Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan and Aliyev promised that they would take Artsakh, the Karabakh region, and pretty much gave them shares of the gold mines. Primarily is what British wants. Blood diamonds, we saw this happen before in Sierra Leone in history. That's why I always try to tell Armenians, not just look at your history, but look at other people's history as well.
Around you as well.
It's 2021, 27 years ago, 1974. There was another country that was just like Armenia that had no natural resources at all, and the world turned a blind eye to what happened to them. It's called the Rwandan genocide. Over 1 million people were butchered to death primarily by machetes. Not a single person lifted a finger. United States, Britain, France, nobody. Even major world powers supplied weapons to Hutu militias, such as France, Belgium, Israel. They gave these weapons to them to slaughter Tutsis. 1 million people put to the sword, and nobody gave a damn. The United States the United Nations itself didn't even intervene at all, because at the end of the day, they had no natural resources. Israel, as much as I don't agree with some of their policies most of the time, what I liked about them most, primarily about their nations, what I admire, is that they had no natural resources and they learned quickly. They became tech giants, they built stuff up. The United States didn't even back Israel until post-1967, after the Six-Day War. What was ironic was that Israel jammed communications from the US consulate. The United States was thinking about backing Egypt during that war. After Israel won, they took the West Bank, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. Golan Heights is still occupied to this day, so is the West Bank. But that's what enticed the West primarily. They switched from socialism to capitalism, and they became tech giants. They exported weapons such as SAM systems to the United States. They became major tech hubs. We used Israeli chips all the time.
They made themselves very valuable.
Very valuable. We see to this day, primarily Israeli vaccines are being shipped around the world right now. This is what Armenians need to do, build their country up, invest. Because at the end of the day, let's just say billionaires and major world powers, they see investments in Armenia. Armenia will never be attacked ever again, because at the end of the day, they're protecting. Those major world powers and billionaires are going to protect their investments.
Of course.
To this day, Turkey's still being backed by NATO primarily because of its investments. And that's what a lot of Armenians need to learn, is that Turkey will never be kicked out of NATO. Because at the end of the day, they won the Geographic Olympics through genocide. Constantinople, Istanbul is probably arguably the most valuable city in the world. The Bosphorus is the most narrow strait in the world, the Dardanelles. You also have Asia Minor, the Incirlik Air Base is actually built on top of former Western Armenia, the capital of Cilician Kingdom, which the United States uses and still puts 50 nuclear warheads in. They also have the Black Sea of Pontus, which was historically Greek and Armenian land, the Kingdom of Pontus, where the Black Sea is, where they can combat the Russian fleet. So it's not, if you can't use your geography to your advantage, become a tech giant, become exports and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, everything you're saying, I'm literally like, it's a web. It's like, imagine a spider web of connections all around them geographically of how they are an asset to Russia or America or, you know, anybody else, any other major country that, or NATO, like you said, like how they're connected and they're never going to be kicked out because they have deeply rooted powers or resources or deeply rooted connections in some way that they will never be, they might get a couple of slaps on the hand, but they're never going to be held responsible or accountable for any of that stuff. You know, it's like blackmailing essentially, like, you know, I'm going to do this for you, you're going to do that for me, and there's nothing you can do about it because that's how the world works now. And that's kind of the sad part is that, you know, you are very blunt when you explain these things, but it's coming from factual, it's coming from history, and when you know history, you know that you can kind of predict the future when you know the history of any country, and then, you know, the surrounding areas, and you'll know, like, well, this is what's gonna happen because this is what happened, you know, 50 years ago or 100 years ago or whatever it may be. So yeah, it's been very tough for us to understand because it's like you're drowning and you want someone to throw you a life vest or, you know, help you into a boat when you're in the middle of the ocean and there's nobody around. And we're like, well, isn't America going to help us? No. Isn't France going to help us? No. Greece? No. You know, like, we really didn't have anything to offer them. You know, the humanitarian thing, you know, it's like, it's bullshit. And I think it's so hard for us to understand that it's not going to come from the kindness of their heart. It's going to come from, like, yeah, if they feel bad, but it's like, oh, well.
Even as you see right now, Russia, even though they primarily helped stop the war, it came at a price. I consider, and no offense to any of the Armenian viewers, Artsakh completely gone, even though half of it's still controlled by Armenia. Half of it is Azerbaijan, the other half became one of the biggest Russian military bases in the Caucasus. That's what came at a price post-Artsakh war. So at the end of the day, no matter what, if a superpower intervenes, they're going to expect something in return. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to send their own men or billions of dollars for peacekeeping missions unless they're getting something out of it. Right.
And I think that the Russian peacekeepers are eventually going to leave. What do you think?
I think eventually as well, unless Russia's pretty much made it clear that they do not want Nikol Pashinyan continuing in the Armenian government. And I'm pretty sure, in my personal opinion, that they are pretty much going to give an ultimatum to where if for some reason he wins the snap elections or the future elections and stays in power, I highly doubt we're going to be seeing Russian peacekeepers stay past 2025.
Yes,
and that's why I feel like Armenians need to hurry and focus, build their economy, spend more money military-wise, build up local NGOs, tech sectors to make the country more valuable to international eyes, so another war like 2020 doesn't happen again.
Yeah. You have a very soft spot in your heart for veterans, for POWs, for any man or woman who served in the war who is coming back with a significant amount of trauma, aside from physical harm and, you know, wounded and things like that, but mentally and emotionally, people who suffer from post-traumatic stress. When it comes to war and things like that. So you've also made it aside from everything we just talked about, you've also made it your mission to do the Row Initiative and help soldiers through art therapy, which is really incredible. That was one of the first things I noticed about you. Please tell our viewers, what is the purpose of Row Initiative and where are you going with that?
So Row Initiative stands for Reflections of War Initiative. And my goal with the Role Initiative is to show basically the horrors of war primarily through art. It's one thing if you try talking to somebody,
therapist,
which is very, very hard for people to open up. I mean, even me, it took me a while to even talk about some of the stuff that I saw in my friends, comrades, that we went through in Afghanistan and overseas. And instead of talking, you could draw out your feelings. Me primarily, I like to draw out victims of war. I look at pictures from history of victims of war, and I draw their plight, the exact story that they went through. Because it's one thing if you look on the news and you see a picture of somebody, you're going to see it, look at it, be distraught for about maybe a day, then you're going to forget it. But if you see the artwork, it's going to stay in your head. And you're going to wonder, like, what is the story behind this? What happened to this person? And that's what gets people critically thinking, and that's my goal. It's not just that as well, but also it's a good form of therapy for veterans where you don't have to orally pronounce what your story is. You could draw it and paint it. I mean, art therapy is not just about art as well. Music, culture, dance, anything, any type of therapeutic art is best to help out veterans.
Of course, yeah, of course. Yeah, we've talked about, veterans, even in the United States, and, because we're here, we see it. I see a lot of veterans out on the streets, and, they can't find jobs, or they can't acclimate back to, working and being with, that civilian life. They can't acclimate back into that. And I can't even fathom, like, the amount of veterans that are in Armenia right now that we're all thinking about, and the POWs that we haven't even gotten back. It's an interesting idea, and most people wouldn't even think to, like, incorporate those two. Where do those veterans, like, go to paint and do those sessions and things like that? How does that happen?
Me, I just use my own apartment. You really don't have to go anywhere primarily. There are art therapy centers. Some of them, they overcharge, is what I hate the most about a lot of art therapy centers, is they like to overcharge people for art therapy sessions. For me, I like to do it for free, which is why I primarily set up a Patreon and my Role Initiative NGO is to help self-fund. So I can go overseas, help out veterans such as the ones going through PTSD in Armenia, Syria, Yemen, soldiers that just need to help acclimate after seeing some of the most brutal stuff
that we can't even unimaginable. Right. So you have your Patreon. You're going to be helping with your independent journalism. It's going to be helping get content out. It's going to be helping perhaps, doing some international traveling and lectures, right?
Yes.
It's going to help with the Role Initiative and maybe going to these countries and setting up like a small room with canvases and paint, which is, not very expensive, but you need some funds to get a small group going or whatever. You're planning on possibly traveling for work soon.
Yes, this year I plan on going to both Lebanon and Cyprus. Lebanon for the 1-year anniversary of the Beirut blast, and I would like to interview people of how they feel about the Beirut blast, government corruption, and the collapse of their currency, the Lebanese lira, which is causing so much homelessness, mass suicides, and it's a very depressing situation because at one point Lebanon was considered the most exotic and best place to live in the Middle East. For Cyprus, I plan on going there to show people the Hellenic cultural heritage of Greek Cypriots and interviews of Greek Cypriot refugees from the 1974 invasion, which was not just a Turkish invasion, but the US and the UK played a major role in this invasion as well. And I also want to show the cultural destruction and cultural genocide of the destruction of a lot of Greek Orthodox icons as well in Cyprus. In 2021, I do plan on going to Armenia sometime in the spring or summer to do art therapy with the veterans as well. I would love to go there during the winter, but of course, nobody likes cold weather.
Right. Very cool. That's a lot of travels and doing some incredible humanitarian work outside of the U.S. There's a lot of work to do here too, but I mean, you really have taken a liking more to, the Middle Eastern parts and the Caucasus and things like that. So I'm happy you're going towards that direction. And I wish you all the best with your work. You have great ideas. I hope they come to fruition. And, thank you for your service in the United States military. I think as bitter as that was and as hard and traumatic as that was for you, it was the trajectory of your career for the last, 3 or 4 years since 2017 when you started, in the university. So, through hard times, you've tried to make the best of it and help others through your pain and through your experiences. So I really commend you for that. And this is not the last time I'm going to be in New York. And as I've mentioned before, you're welcome to come to Los Angeles, and we can do another interview with you and see how much you've progressed and what you've done between now and then. And thank you again for the passion you put behind everything that you do.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.